Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on this presentation on what is Agile Project Management. I'll be your host, Bill Washinsky. I'm a PMP, CSM, and CSPO, meaning Project Manager, Project Manager Professional, Certified Scrum Master, and Certified Scrum Product Owner. And today we're going to tackle the question, what is Agile Project Management? Well, Agile Project Management's been kind of a buzzword going around, and a whole lot more around this time of recording here in 2021. And a lot of companies are moving forward and going in that direction, as I have done Agile coaching as well as been a Scrum Master. And what is Agile, though? It keeps coming up. How do you describe Agile? Well, Agile as a project management has been around in a sense. It began over 20 years ago, and it has grown in size and popularity with all kind of organizations. But at a conference once, an Agile thought leader was confronted and asked to define Agile, and his definition was pretty surprising to a lot of people, in that he said, is about making the best decision quickly every time, and that the worst decision we can make is indecision. Then he uttered the words that rocked the Agile community: fail early and fail often. Because failure it breeds the innovation that organizations strive for. We're destined to learn from our mistakes and encourage us to be open-minded as we build things. This is the definition of innovation. But what is Agile in comparison to other types of project management? Well, there's the PMP, as most people know. It's the way it's been called the traditional approach or the waterfall approach, and it's very linear, very sequential. Projects are divided into phases, they're handed off. And it's really about managing the scope of a project. And its main certification is now the PMP. It has been the PMP. The PMP, though, has moved. PMI in itself has made the PMP exam half Agile. And currently, for anybody who's had the PMP, if they wanted to get more familiar on the Agile side, there's what's called the PMI ACP and the CSM, Agile Certified Practitioner and Certified Scrum Master. And this is more about an incremental approach. This is more about separating the project into sprints, and as opposed to that traditional waterfall approach where you know what your scope is at the end. This one allows for changes at times. That's the whole point. So where it's kind of is different is that it wants to promote and respond to change in a more flexible, organic way. And the end result is Agile Project Management is a little bit less predictable in comparison with the waterfall method, but this is not necessarily a bad thing. We can look at this from 2018. This is from PMI itself, Project Management Institute. The Postal Profession Survey, they did a survey of seeing how companies were actually executing their project management, and 47% were still using that traditional predictive methodology. However, Agile continues to grow in that you see we got about 46% if we look at Agile and a combined Agile predictive approach. So it is gaining more and more steam. Here's a good way of illustrating it. We talked about the scope and cost and time. When you talk about traditional project management, you're going to be looking at managing your schedule and your time. You want it on time and within budget. You don't want it falling out of that scope. With Agile, it's flip it around. you're value driven, you're vision driven, and your end goals, that those features. So you're looking at one plan that creates feature estimates, another plan that creates cost and schedule estimates. In a traditional project manager, they have the responsibility of executing, closing, planning any project. It's typically height, weight, predictive, and that's why it's called the waterfall. And a traditional tool has been using something like MS Project, where you're looking at measuring with Gantt charts, looking at dependencies, seeing how you are going against target and the variance. And this is a very effective approach. Make no mistake, it's not just some kind of ragtag. This is very effective, and you can measure how you're doing very well as long as you know what your end goal is. And that's the key to success with it. When you're looking at more of an agile approach, as opposed to the project manager, there can be a couple of different agile methods and agile roles here. Typically, you're looking at 3 to 5 different roles in there that really just kind of goes to a class of customer, facilitator, and implementer. The customer would be anyone who acts or speaks on behalf of the end customer. And in these titles, they can vary quite a bit, but the responsibility should never change. So we don't want to get stuck on the titles, but in Scrum, this would be product owner. Facilitator, this is somebody who is more of a translator. They take technical things, make them easy to understand, facilitate meetings, and help remove obstacles whenever possible. And in Scrum, they're simply called Scrum Master. And implementers, these are the people who get their hands dirty to get the job done. They're responsible for making things happen, and in Scrum, they're called the development team. So those 3 categories fit into these agile roles where they kind of intersect, or more likely to say Scrum roles: Scrum Master, Product Owner, Team. And some of the other people that can be involved in there might be stakeholders, subject matter experts, and business owners, just to name a few. One of the big tools is what's called a product roadmap. Now, this is a little different than the project plan. Well, quite a bit different, because we're looking at an overall strategy, if you will. It's focusing on product goals, strategic initiatives, key releases that deliver on the goals, master features, epics, major user stories, overall timeline. Whereas a project plan looks at project goals and objectives, important milestones and tasks, how you're allocating your resources, potential risks, and a project timeline. And in the roadmap, you have, you can see here a nice way of looking at one. You have a date, the release date, or a time frame of releasing your feature, the name of that new release, the goal, the benefit that the product should offer, and those features, the high-level features that are necessary to meet the goal. And then finally, of course, what metrics you're going to use to measure your success by. Back in 2001, a group of software developers came up with this process of what's called the Agile Manifesto, where these are the 4 values. There's 12 principles. We're just going to go with the 4 values here. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change versus following the plan. And that is while there's value in the items on the right in the Agile Manifesto, we value the items on the left more. And in a way, kind of the working software over comprehensive documentation, you can almost say that's just, you can replace that word software with services or products. It can work the same way. The customer collaboration over contract negotiation. There was a time contracts were king. Everything was in the contract. Now they want to have the customer more involved throughout as they're seeing the product get done. Just a quick look on some terms that we're going to hit back on a little bit more. Backlog item. This is an incremental unit of work delivered to a potentially shippable state over the course of a sprint. A sprint is a predefined 1 to 4 work period in which the work actually gets done. Usually it's about 2 weeks. Potentially shippable. At the end of each sprint, whether you introduce whatever was built in production, either in replacement of or in conjunction with existing technology without having any major known defects or technical debt. So you might have something you're ready to go, yet shippable, which means it's the ability to place a feature-rich, minimum viable product in the hands of the consumer or the MVP. MMF, minimal marketable feature, and the epic is a backlog item that's too large to fit into any single sprint. So when implemented correctly, Agile Project Management can benefit every project manager to some degree. As we stated, it's less restrictive and it caters for a far more interactive and inflexible process. Now, this seems to go against this tradition of being organized, working at set time frames with set parameters. And because there's times where this is essential. But it is the most effective form of project management for any project that really includes higher levels of change and risk over a shortened point of time. This might be a little surprising to you here when we say Agile. It's much more than a single methodology. In fact, you can argue that Agile methodology in and of itself doesn't even exist. Easily, we can go through over 40 plus types of Agile. Some of the more popular ones being known as DevOps, Prince2, Kanban, Lean, and of course Scrum. And we'll look at those top 3 high-level strategies. Scrum is the one we're going to spend the most time on here today because it is the most implemented, but it's designed to execute tasks over a short frame with frequent customer involvement and the ability to make change quickly. Scrum thinking provides the how. How is about the implementation of. Lean relies heavily on the system. And the Toyota production system really worked very well in the Toyota manufacturing. And it's all about eliminating waste to improve efficiency. And it focuses on the what. Kanban is a focus on limiting on work in process called WIP. And you have a Kanban board where you can see what you have to do in progress and done. So it's about visualizing your workflow. One thing that stands different about Kanban, when you do estimates, it really goes to get factual data and does not go with estimates. So it'll look at something quantifiable, and it balances demand with capacity. You're not putting too much work that you cannot get done in Kanban. Now, Scrum is the most popular and well-known form, and when you see Agile Scrum, it's kind of a oxymoron there because Scrum is a form. It is an Agile framework. It is under the Agile umbrella. The definition of Scrum is an ordered formation of players used to restart play in which a team forwards the ball, forwards the team form up with arms interlocked and heads down. They push forward against a similar group from the opposing side. The ball is thrust in the scrum, and the players try to gain possession by kicking it towards their own side. It's a big interlocking activity. And Scrum is an agile framework for completing those complex projects. And as opposed to that heavyweight traditional waterfall, it is simple to understand. It's lightweight, but it is difficult to master. And why is it so difficult to master? And I'll tell you exactly why. There's a joke about the senior Scrum Master, how you can tell one. You can tell a senior Scrum Master because they got the battle scars to prove it. There's a lot of resistance to change. We're hardwired as people against change. Birds of a feather flock together. You hire people who are like you. You hang out with people who are like you. We do not like uncertainty, and it's just ingrained in our minds, in our bodies. You know, it actually impacts our brains. The same part of the brain that is triggered by change and uncertainty is the same part that lights up when stimulated by physical pain. So going into an organization and trying to implement a Agile framework or Scrum can be very difficult because you're going to be a change agent. So there's a lot of soft skills and techniques that have to go in there to become successful. The first part here, Scrum roles. What are the Scrum roles? Well, there's the Scrum team. Commonly just called the team. It's small, 3 to 9 individuals, not including the Scrum Master and product owner. Co-located, at least virtually, self-organized, cross-functional, value-driven. Self-organized means the self-organized team is one that chooses how best to accomplish work rather than being directed / micromanaged by others outside the team. Since the team other members work together, this facilitates learning and motivates the team to take ownership of its process. Cross-functional is a team that contains all the knowledge and skills to accomplish its objectives and goals and allows it to finish its work without getting outside help. Value-driven. Team members value working together and so thus constantly are improving themselves. The team, their environment, their tools, and these values that they strive for are the 5 pillars of Scrum: openness, focus, commitment, courage, and respect. The product owner, to start off with, this is the voice of the customer. This is your business person, if you will, or a key stakeholder. This is one of the hardest roles in Scrum that can be possibly done. And why is it that you say that? Well, it's a very difficult and yet highly underestimated role. And here from Agile Dad is a definition. The product owner is the person solely responsible for implicitly understanding the wants, needs, whims, and desires of the end consumer. They do this by facilitating conversations with support about the things the consumer may be struggling the most with, and with trainers about the new thoughts and ideas the consumer may be thinking. They also host focus groups where they record data they discover about the current product they are working on, as well as enhancements for upcoming products. This individual is also responsible for understanding all of the business acumen behind why the product was built, whom it was built for, how and where the product is used, and when it entered the marketplace. They need to understand the return on investment for this product, as well as the strategic value the product holds for the organization. This lucky individual also needs to have a pure understanding of how their product works and with what other products it integrates. They need to understand what other products do and how they relate to your product. They also need to fully understand the software development lifecycle in order to best determine the life expectancy of their core product. Like, is it brand new? Is it emerging? Is the sun rising or sun setting on it? How many versions of software we plan to support? This person needs to fully understand the technological feasibility of the product. They need to quickly assess and determine if there are actual requests for enhancements or defects that require more immediate attention. With all this information, they expect to maintain full upward mobility and be a pure representation of the end consumer to the sponsor and a representation of the sponsor to the teams working on the project. They are expected to report with 100% accuracy at the risk of losing their job if at any point they are incorrect. They're also solely responsible for the creation and maintenance of a stacked, ranked product backlog, release plan, and a one-year roadmap. And that's all. That's all, huh? That's a lot. And it's actually more than what one person can do. And you can go very deep into what a product owner is, but who the product owner relies upon as a product owner team. But the bottom line is this little comic strip here, it shows that you got skin in the game. If you have the chicken and the pig, if they're talking about opening up a restaurant and calling it ham and eggs, who's really got their skin in the game on this one? Who's committed and who's involved? Consider the product owner. The product owner is the Scrum team's eyes and ears to the outside world, to the stakeholders. This person is the Scrum team's one point of formal contact, a conduit of information. Add to this, the product owner has the Scrum team's back, meaning they're the ones being held accountable for the Scrum team results, and the product owner is consumed with making sure the Scrum team is getting the right feedback to make the right product at the right place. The product owner spends a lot of time scoping the product, clarifying murky expectations, negotiating delivery dates, and making it all fit for the Scrum team. We should all note that although the word owner is not the title, or isn't a title, the product owner may not be a product expert. Granted, the product owner has a whole lot of knowledge and skills, but the role is defined by the accountability, not by the product specific skills. A good product owner realizes there may be a wealth of smarts both inside and outside the team that knows how to leverage this for both the Scrum team's good and the product's good. The Scrum Master, the servant leader. This goes against the command and control. This is the person who is responsible for the health of the team, and they have to be the change agent. They got to ensure that all the necessary buy-in is occurring from the team and the organization without any formal leadership or authority. So moving the organization from a command and control structure to one based upon the servant leadership, putting the team first. Moving from a plan-driven to a project management structure that is based upon incremental and empirical data. This can be very, very challenging and requires a great degree of patience and determination. And while the product owner is the eyes and ears towards the outside world, the Scrum Master's eyes and ears are pointed decidedly inward. As stated, the Scrum Master is an informal leader. Word about what's going on within the Scrum team. and making sure that Scrum is being used correctly. Part facilitator, part influencer, part guru, part sheepdog. The Scrum Master is a leader without managerial responsibilities, and they are focused on the health of the Scrum team and the team's continuous improvement, especially when it comes to the Scrum team's use of Scrum. The Scrum Master does this by helping improve the Scrum team behaviors and working relationships, removing stumbling blocks, aka impediments, and dealing with constraints. Many people new to Scrum quickly understand that getting to know their Scrum Master is essential to being grounded and productive. Because the Scrum Master is inward looking and the product owner is outward facing, a lot of organizations find difficulty with this. It's inappropriate to have the same team member play both roles of product owner and Scrum Master. In fact, most Scrum experts believe it's harmful to the team if this were to happen. The term development team is used to represent the portion of the Scrum team that is currently developing or creating the product. This may or may not include the product owner and the Scrum Master. It is entirely proper and often useful for the product owner and Scrum Master to be on the development team, but they must always realize their leadership roles come first. We can think of the development team as a little like the three musketeers operating in the motto as all for one and one for all. But when Scrum is really working well and teams are performing at a high level, the development team acts in the development team's best interest, with everyone doing their part to achieve the collective goal and each member being held responsible for the production of the development team's product. Unlike many work teams, development teams function on a level playing field. There are no specialized role. It is as straightforward as it sounds. Every team member is just that, a team member. So development teams tend to be pretty small, ideally around 5 people. So what's the Scrum framework? Let's take a look at that. There's a product backlog, and it goes and points to sprint planning. And you see it points to sprint backlog, and then, oh, there's your Scrum team, and a little ball there says daily Scrum and a sprint review, and circles all the way around to a sprint retrospective and a product backlog and a potentially shippable increment. What does all of this mean? Well, let's kind of go through some of these parts and some of these events, if you will. So we mentioned there was the sprint planning. Here's the daily stand-up. There's the actual sprint itself. There's the retrospective. And there's the review. So who owns and who helps with what? While not an official ceremony, backlog refinement, also known as grooming, is the responsibility of the product owner and is assisted by other members of the team, the development team and the Scrum Master. They also own the sprint planning. There's the development team that owns the daily Scrum, the product owner that owns the sprint review, as well as the Scrum Master owning the sprint retrospective. With an output to each one of them, product backlog from product refinement. Sprint planning is the sprint backlog. Daily Scrum, product increments. Sprint review is a business demo. And the sprint retrospective is to look back and get feedback and health on the team. The sprint is quite frankly well known as the heart of Scrum. It's a time box of a month or less, usually 2 weeks, in which a done, usable, potentially releasable product increment is created. Sprints have consistent durations throughout a development effort, and a new sprint starts immediately after the conclusion of the previous sprint. As we saw, the sprint consists of the planning, development work, the backlog refinement, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. And during the sprint, no changes are made that will endanger the sprint goal. Quality goals do not increase. Scope may be clarified. and negotiated between the product owner and the development team. We'll go in more detail on that a little later on. And the sprint may be canceled by the product owner if, i.e., the sprint goal becomes obsolete. Usually more stakeholders are involved, but the only person that can cancel it officially is the product owner. Let's take a look at this in practice. Here's an example. You got a 2-week sprint. Say it starts on day 1, you plan it out. Day 2 is daily scrum, and you may refine that backlog. As a matter of fact, you should be doing that for an hour a week. You hold your daily scrum, then you have a review, you get feedback, then there's a daily scrum again. We continue this through all the way through until we get to the end of the sprint. 2 weeks, and we start it all over again. So what does sprint planning do? It answers the following. What can be delivered from one increment from the upcoming sprint, and how will that work? Needed to deliver the increment be achieved. Well, let's look at what a sprint planning meeting might look like. You have your product owner, your development team, and they'll talk to each other about what needs to be done. In this case, they'll talk about the next product they're working on. It's going to be a story, a user story, and it's going to be heavy on database. So they talk about it and negotiate what's the definition of done, and the team agrees to do a story. And the product owner might introduce another database heavy one. And they'll talk about it more, figure out what the definition of done is, and agree to it. And then they'll tell them something, maybe, hey, what's next? But the database stories, that's a little bit more that we can handle. You make sure it's been done with a little shake there. But the product owner may want another database one, but understanding that since there's good communication going on, they'll skip it and they'll go to the one beneath it, which in this case be maybe one for a new business rule. So they talk about it again, have their discussion, and they'll say, oh, we got it. But there's room for one more, but it's got to be a small one. And just to remind you, not another database one. So how about clean interface? And the team will go look at it and say, oh, nope, that's not going to fit. We're done. So the sprint is set. This is what they've committed to. And okay. And throughout the whole sprint, they'll have a daily stand-up every day, 15 minutes, where they'll talk about the typical questions of what have you done since the last daily stand-up. It's also known as daily scrum. 15-minute increment. What have you done since the last stand-up? What are you going to do today? And what's standing in your way? Understand at the end of the day, the product backlog goes to the sprint backlog, taking stories from the product backlog. The product backlog representing that ultimate list of ideas for the product ordered in which the manner the product owner desires the team to work on them. The sprint backlog is a set of stories with solid definitions of done that the team has agreed to complete during the sprint. So we just saw that happen in sprint planning. What happens during the product backlog refinement? It's an ongoing process of reviewing backlog items, ensuring they're accurately prioritized and clearly defined. And the product backlog represents the ultimate list of ideas for the product. So let's look at what a product backlog refinement meeting might look like. A Scrum Master comes in, as does the product owner and the team. And the Scrum Master is always facilitating. What they're going to do is take a look and clarify and decompose the highest priority product backlog items, PBIs, and any work that represents business value may be included in the product backlog. What's product, but what's business value? Business value is not exactly something you can wrap your finger around and say, hey, this is what it means. But it could mean anything that has value to the organization. It could be something reducing risk. It could be doing something that has to do with ROI or growth. It could be something that have to do with making sure that bugs are not in there, into their product. It could be a marketing. Whatever constitutes value takes up time, attention, and effort, goes in to what business value means. One objective is the PBIs must meet what's called INVEST. It's an acronym that we'll touch on in a little bit later, but they must meet this INVEST category. And Mr. Product Owner is responsible for the product vision and the return on investment. So they'll look at the product backlog and determine the priorities. And in this particular project, they might say, here's my top priority items. And they'll list them off, looking at the backlog, which should be posted. And then they'll put them up there, top to bottom. And of course, as we said, they might not be the most technologically feasible person on the team. And they'll go to the team and the individuals getting the work done, and they'll be like, whoa, it might not be possible. So let's take this. We have no idea when it'll be done. It'll be done when it's done. And that could shake the product owner up a bit. And if there's a little bit of fight back, you're not getting us what we need. And that's the job of the Scrum Master, to come in there and facilitate everybody together. Business people and developers must work on daily throughout the project. So let's focus on the top few items only. So through that meeting, you might have somebody who says, oh, wait a minute, I'm just a tester. I don't know anything about development. And the Scrum Master has to pull this person back in and get them to buy into the entire process. So when that person says, you mind if I go and just play on with my phone and play a little chess until you get around to testing? And the Scrum Master's like, oh, wait a minute, guys, I got this. So maybe your background and skills mostly in testing, but now you're a Scrum team member, and a team is collectively responsible for a slice of each product of the sprint. It could be a thick or a thin slice. So if they ask the team what they think of the development. Well, in the past, I may have just written code and handed it off to be tested. And we got a tester here with a lot of experience in testing. Now we can figure out how to work together. Well, who died and made you the boss? I don't work for you, which shakes everybody up. But yes, you do. Just as we work for you. We're on the same team, one for all for one. A self-organized team. We're accountable to each other. And holy moly, you are right. I am sorry. And this is a time-boxed meeting. It's an hour long, so we should focus on those top items. And how do you think we should do that? We should use team exercises because time-based assessments are a waste of time. So we're not going to look at things in terms of saying this is going to take 1 hour or 2 hours. We're going to say, hey, how big of a job is it? And using t-shirt sizes means like small, extra large, medium, just to get a sense of how big a job. One person might say small, one person might say extra large, and one person might say large. And they'll see the reason behind those estimates. And you'll see what each individual feels about the exact work that goes into it. And you get the feedback from the product owner to understand. And they find out that, hey, maybe this top one is a little bit too big to break down. And we'll say this story, this BAT PBI, is actually an epic, which is a very large item. So we can split this into user stories, which was basically the part of the reason for this whole meeting in the first place. And remember, most people don't use most features of most products. Even the features they do use can be split into more valuable and less valuable parts. So let's go ahead and get those more valuable parts into small user stories. And we'll figure out what does not count in and what should count in. So what are user stories in Agile? A user story is the smallest unit of work in an Agile framework. It's the end goal, not a feature, expressed from the software user's perspective. It's an informal, general explanation of the software feature written from the perspective of the end user or customer. User stories are requirements, technique on projects. And it's communication of resource allocation between those who want something built and those who want to build it. So let's learn what the user story is just a little bit more. There's 3 C's of a user story, and they put these on a note card. They like to use that. Stories are traditionally written on a note card, an index card. It can be annotated with estimates, notes, and etc. And before you start saying, hey, why should we be using this old-fashioned note card? Well, I don't know about you, but I can tell you what, I had my grandma used to write a whole lot of recipes and things on these note cards. And they can also be put on Post-it notes, by the way. The most important part, though, the conversation. Why is the conversation the most important? Well, the details behind the story come out during a conversation with the product owner. It's a promise from the team to the product owner that instead of getting a whole big cumbersome list of requirements and a big stack, that they're going to continue to talk throughout. And a confirmation, finally, acceptance hence confirms the story was coded correctly. What was that highly technological language? In essence, we're confirming that we're meeting all the conditions of satisfaction so that we can say it is done. Very, very important. Balance is critical in writing user stories. If one side or the other dominates, if the business side goes, maybe they'll only focus on these functionality and these dates, and they're mandated. There's little regard or reality to whether or not the developers understand the mandates. And they're long upfront in the requirements, negotiations, and here's a sign off. Features are progressively dropped as the deadline nears. It was not fully understood. On this side, you might have technical language and jargon replacing the language of the business. They lose the opportunity to learn from listening, and they may trade quality for additional features or may partially implement a feature and may solely make decisions that should involve the entire business. So what's the user story? Well, you're looking at right there. Using this format. Description. As a site member. Or as a who. I would like to what, so that why. So the as is a person. The other part is I can, I need, I think, I want. So that tells us the why of what the person is looking for. And on the back of that card, you flip it over. It's a beautiful part. Take this physical card, flip it on over. You can verify a premium members can cancel the same day without a fee and so on. And note, put a little checkbox in there so you can check them off as you go. Acceptance criteria. What is acceptance criteria? The terms and conditions that must be met in order to accept as a definition of done, but is not the definition of done. And this gets confused a lot. That acceptance criteria are specific for a requirement. It represents that agreement that the team reaches with the product owner. Definition done is that set of standards that meet a releasable product increment. And these metrics, they want to be measured by something that's specific. What do you want to do? Measurable. How will you know when you've reached it? Achievable. Is it in your power to accomplish it? Realistic. Can you realistically achieve it? And timely. When do you want to finish it? Otherwise known as SMART. These are your goals. And we're looking at user stories. We want them to be independent, internally independent. User story should be a standalone product backlog item, a PBI, with no dependencies during their execution. So they should be able to be done. Negotiable. They can be changed at any time. They're agreed to in the planning and delivered. That's the I want. Valuable. Each story adds something useful. So that. Estimable. The team can estimate the size in a clear and concise explanation. We definitely want to avoid technical and role-specific language. Small. That it's sizable enough to be developed and tested, as they're easy to estimate, test, and have fewer misunderstandings to get to that definition of done. Testable. Each story must be testable and verifiable so the team can determine when it's done, best when automated. Do not consider an item done unless it's tested. There's two other items here, and they're going to be covered in other videos, but we're going to look at the sprint review. This is when the Scrum team, they demo what has been accomplished during the sprint. It's one of the very biggest meetings. They're going to show what their work does. This one can have a lot of individuals invited to it. Typically a 2-hour meeting. Typically once or twice a sprint. They're going to assess what has been agreed to and what the sprint goal was and how they measure against it. The sprint retrospective. What happens here is there's a famous quote, and I'm sure that you've heard. Those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Sounds a little bit gloomy, doesn't it? Well, this is a chance to find out what went right, what went wrong, what you can do better. Focus then on removing mistakes and not doing them again. And we'll follow up on this in another video as well, on how this can be done best and how one might look. And at the end of the day, that's all for it. I hope you enjoy this presentation. And it gives you an inside look at what Agile is and a little bit of breakdown. If you'd like to learn more about Agile, you can continue to follow this channel and listen to the Agile Financial Podcast. I would be your host, Bill Washinsky, and I thank you much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye now.